Call came on a Tuesday morning, 3 days before Christmas. I was standing in my kitchen, still in my bathrobe, pouring my second cup of coffee when my son's name lit up the screen. I smiled when I picked up. I figured he was calling to confirm what time I should drive up to the cabin. "Dad." His voice was flat. Not cold exactly, but flat in a way that made me set the mug down. "About the cabin this weekend." "Yeah," I said. "I was thinking I'd leave Thursday morning, beat the traffic. We need to talk about that." He paused. "The thing is, Claire's been planning this for a while now. She wants it to be just us. Her family's flying in from Phoenix. Her sister, her sister's husband, a couple of her friends from work." I stood there holding the phone, not saying anything. The cabin only sleeps 8 comfortably, and with her family it's already going to be tight. Claire thought it would be better if... Another pause. "If you maybe did something on your own this year." I looked out the window. The backyard was grey and dead. The bird feeder I'd hung in October, still empty because I kept forgetting to fill it. My wife used to fill it every week without fail. She'd been gone 4 years now. "The cabin I bought," I said slowly. "The one I've owned for 11 years. Dad, don't make this weird. I'm not making anything weird, son. I'm just noting that it's my cabin." He sighed. It was the sigh of a man who had rehearsed this conversation with his wife the night before, and had promised her he wouldn't back down. "I know that sigh. I used to do it myself 35 years ago when I was young and foolish and thought making your wife happy meant doing whatever she said. Claire's already invited everyone. It'll be really awkward to change things now." "Awkward," I repeated. "Dad." "All right," I said. "You have a good Christmas." I hung up before he could say anything else. I poured the rest of my coffee down the drain and stood at the sink for a long time, watching the water run. Here's what my son didn't know about that cabin. I bought it in 2013, the year after my wife Lorraine was diagnosed. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, which is the medical way of saying they aren't sure about anything but don't want to scare you. We'd always talked about having a place in the mountains, something small, somewhere to go when the city got loud. So I bought it. We spent 3 Christmases up there together before she got too sick to travel. After she passed, I kept going. Alone, mostly. Sometimes my son would come, early on, before Claire. The cabin was the one place I still felt like myself, like the version of me that existed before grief became my full-time occupation. When my son brought Claire home, for the first time, 4 years ago, I tried. I genuinely tried. She was pretty and sharp, and had an opinion about everything, which I respected even when those opinions were wrong. We had a few strained dinners. I paid for their wedding, which cost more than my first house. I gave them the down payment on their condo in Scottsdale. When my son's company downsized last spring, and he was out of work for 3 months, I covered their mortgage, twice. I never said a word about any of it. My own father used to hold money over people's heads like a hammer, and I swore I'd never do that. So I gave freely, and I kept my mouth shut, and I told myself that this was what parents did. The Christmas thing, though, that landed differently. I drove to my neighbour Hank's house that afternoon. Retired teacher, lives 3 doors down, we have coffee together most Fridays. I sat at his kitchen table and told him what happened. He listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I appreciate about Hank. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet," I said. But that wasn't true. By the time I drove home, I already knew. That night I pulled up my online banking and looked at the accounts. 3 years ago, when my son was complaining about the interest rate on his credit cards, I had added him as an authorized user on one of my accounts. It gave him access to a card with a $15,000 limit. He used it for groceries, gas, the occasional dinner out. I never minded. I figured it was one less thing for him to stress about. I removed him as an authorized user at 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Then I called my accountant, a woman named Phyllis, who has handled my finances for 15 years and does not rattle easily. I told her I wanted to restructure some things. She asked a few questions, made some notes, and said she'd have paperwork ready by the end of the week. Then I called my attorney, a man named Rudd who has been practicing estate law in Phoenix for 30 years and has seen everything twice. I told him I needed to revisit my will. "How significant a revision?" he asked. "Significant," I said. Then I went to bed and slept better than I had in months. Christmas Eve, I drove up to the cabin alone, not to make a scene. Not to confront anyone, I just wanted to see it. My name is on the deed. I can go whenever I want. I got there around 2 in the afternoon. There were 3 cars in the driveway that I didn't recognize, and through the front window I could see people moving around inside, a Christmas tree lit up in the corner. Music playing. Someone laughed loud enough that I could hear it from the driveway. I sat in my truck for about 10 minutes. Then I drove to the hardware store in town. The man behind the counter was maybe 25, bored, picking at his thumbnail. I told him I needed to rekey the locks on a property. He said they could have someone out by the 27th. I said that worked fine and left him my number. On the way back through town, I stopped at a diner and ordered a turkey sandwich and a slice of pie. The waitress was a grandmother type who kept calling me honey and refilled my coffee without being asked. I left her a $30 tip on a $14 check. I drove back to Phoenix that evening, and on the way I called my brother Chet in Albuquerque. He's 71, retired, widowed like me, and we have the kind of relationship where we can go 3 months without talking and then pick up exactly where we left off. I told him what was happening. He made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a groan. "Come spend Christmas with me," he said. "Helen's kids are all coming. It'll be loud and chaotic and somebody always breaks something." "That sounds perfect," I said. It was. We played cards until midnight. His grandkids climbed all over me. I drank 2 glasses of bourbon and watched old football on cable and went to sleep on a pull-out couch that was slightly too short for me, and I woke up on Christmas morning feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Claire. They came back from the cabin on December 27th. I know this because my son called me at 6:14 p.m. I let her go to voicemail. The message was short. "Dad, we're back. Give me a call when you get a chance. Calm. Normal." He didn't know yet. He called again at 7:30. I let that one go too. At 8:45, he called from Claire's phone. I picked up. "Dad." His voice had changed. "What did you do?" "Which part?" I asked. "The card's not working. Claire tried to use it this afternoon and it was declined, and I talked to Rudd. Rudd had sent the revised documents to my son's address the day after Christmas, per my instructions. I had removed him entirely from my estate and redirected everything to a charitable trust I had established years ago with Lorraine, focused on children's literacy programs. It was something she cared about deeply. It had always felt right to me that her name would stay attached to something good in the world. "Dad, you can't just—" He stopped. Started again. "We need to talk about this." "We are talking," I said. "In person. You need to come over." "I don't think I do," I said. "But I'll tell you what. You're welcome to come here, both of you. We can sit at the kitchen table, have some coffee, and talk like adults. But I want you to know going in that the card is not coming back, and Rudd has already filed the paperwork, and those are not negotiating points." A long silence. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, and I could hear it in his voice. Not anger exactly, but something closer to genuine bewilderment. He actually didn't know. That was the part that hurt the most, if I'm being honest. Not the anger, not the entitlement. The fact that he genuinely didn't understand what he had done. "Son," I said, "you told me I wasn't welcome at my own cabin at Christmas, that my presence would be inconvenient for your wife's friends. And before that, you've taken money from me for years, without a thank you or a thought, and I gave it freely because I love you, and I wanted to help. But there's a line between helping someone and being used by them, and I let that line get blurred for a long time, and I'm done doing that." He was quiet. "The cabin is getting rekeyed next week," I continued. "If you'd like a key, you can ask me, and we'll see how things go. But it's my cabin, and my money, and my Christmas." "Claire's going to be upset," he said. That told me everything I needed to know about where his head was. "I imagine she will be," I said. "Good night, son." They came over 2 days later, New Year's Eve. Claire walked in, looking the way she always looked when she was preparing to be reasonable at someone. Chin slightly up, voice soft and controlled. She sat across from me at the kitchen table and folded her hands. My son sat beside her looking exhausted. "We wanted to clear the air," she said. "Okay," I said. She talked for a while, about how the holidays were stressful, about how she had been trying to manage her family's expectations and hadn't been thinking clearly, about how of course I was always welcome at the cabin. That had never been in question. She said the word miscommunication 4 times. She said she had the highest respect for me. She said they valued our relationship and hoped we could move past this. I listened to all of it. I appreciate you coming, I said when she finished. And I hear what you're saying, but I want to be honest with you both. This isn't something I'm doing in anger. I've thought about it carefully, and I think it's the right thing. What does that mean? My son asked. It means the card stays closed, I said. It means the will stays as written. It means going forward, if you need something, you ask me directly and we'll talk about it like family. But the arrangement where I'm funding your life without being considered a member of it, that's over. Claire's composure slipped a little, just around the eyes. So you're punishing us? No, I said. I'm stopping a pattern that wasn't good for any of us, including you. She didn't have a response to that. My son stared at his hands. After a while, he looked up. I'm sorry, Dad. At about the cabin. That was wrong. I believed him. My son is not a bad person. He's a man who got comfortable with a situation and stopped thinking about what it cost other people to maintain it. I've known plenty of people like that. I've probably been one at certain points in my life. I know, I said. I forgive you. That part I meant too. In February, my son and I had lunch together, just the two of us, at a diner near his office. We talked about his job search, about the Phoenix Suns, about a podcast he'd been listening to, normal things. It felt a little careful, like we were both testing the ice, but it was real. At the end, he picked up the check before I could reach for it. It was $14 and some change. He didn't say anything about it, just handed the server his card. I didn't say anything either, but I noticed. That spring, I drove up to the cabin for a long weekend. I took Hank with me. We fished in the mornings and played gin rummy in the evenings and ate sandwiches over the sink like two men who had no one telling us to use plates. The bird feeder on the back porch, a little wooden one that Lorraine had picked out at a craft fair back in 2011. I filled it for the first time in years. By the second morning, a pair of mountain chickadees had found it. I sat on the porch with my coffee and watched them come and go. The air was cold and clean and smelled like pine, and there was no sound except the birds in the creek, somewhere below, and the occasional creak of the cabin settling in the wind. I thought about Lorraine, about how she would have handled all of this, with more patience than I had, probably, and more grace, but she would have drawn the same line eventually. She was soft until she wasn't. I always loved that about her. I thought about my son, about the long road between where we were and where I hoped we'd get to. There were no guarantees. Family isn't a contract. You can't enforce love, and you can't invoice gratitude. All you can do is be clear about what you will and won't accept, and then live with the consequences of being clear. I was okay with the consequences. The chickadees came back a third time. I refilled my coffee and stayed on that porch until the sun moved enough to take the warmth out of the morning, and then I went inside and started thinking about what to make for lunch.